Welcome to Restoring the Mind. My name is Khalid Mahmood, and today our guest is Diante Fuchs. Diante is a clinical psychologist from New Zealand, and she is the author of The Gift of Anxiety. Welcome to Restoring the Mind, Diante.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay. To start with, can we have a little bit of your background, please, and how you started your journey to becoming a clinical psychologist, and also your upbringing in South Africa, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am in New Zealand, but I've only been here for 10 years. Before this, we were living in South Africa, where I did my training to be a psychologist. I think I've always known I wanted to be a psychologist. I remember I was probably in high school when I read my first book around a woman who had 16 personalities. The book was called Sybil, I believe. And it was at that point where I thought, this is the work that I want to do. This is the thing that I want to do, is help people to integrate themselves and find themselves again. So obviously, straight after high school, I went into study and I completed my degree, my master's degree. And as all fledgling psychologists do, I started with all of the enthusiasm. When you are training to become a psychologist, you're learning to do all the things. So they're training you in all of what we would call psychiatric disorders: anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, psychotic disorders, you name it. And of course, when you're starting out, then you'll work with anyone that will come into your door and come and work with you. And I remember in the beginning of my career, I was actually quite nervous about working with anxiety. I felt like we had given all the textbooks, we had learned all the strategies, we'd been taught that we needed to teach relaxation and coping skills and cognitive behavior therapy to transform thinking patterns. And whenever I had somebody who was anxious in my office, I landed up feeling anxious too, largely because these strategies just didn't seem to do the trick. I felt like I was working with maybe a quarter of people who would come and then they would find some benefit or some improvement in their anxiety. But probably about three-quarters of my clients who were anxious were coming back week after week after week, feeling the same. And it was around about that same time that I myself landed up feeling quite anxious. I was probably in my late 20s by this stage, and I sort of just started my practice, or probably 2 years in. And all of a sudden, I was waking up with anxiety and feeling really afraid about the day. I couldn't really describe why I felt that way. There was no real reason that I could pinpoint, but it kind of just grew, like it snowballed to the point at which at one stage I was desperately afraid to do anything alone. Like I could go out of the house, but I needed to have somebody with me, my husband particularly. I even remember I was trying to buy a new car at the time, and I was too afraid to go and test drive the vehicle. So I would sit at home online looking for the cars that I was interested in. And then I would send my husband to go and do the test driving for me. So, thankfully he has good taste in cars because we managed to buy a pretty good vehicle through that. But, being a therapist myself, I thought I better go and sort this out. So I went to go and see my own psychologist. And we did a bit of CBT and we did a bit of digging. And I quickly found out that a lot of what was happening was this sort of new branch into running my own private practice, and a bit of imposter syndrome that was coming up for me, and a little bit of my core beliefs from my own childhood and upbringing that had been triggered. And I very quickly worked through that, and my anxiety settled very quickly. So I learned quite a lot through that experience around how important it is to be able to identify what it is that's actually driving anxiety. It's not just that this is a disorder, right? There's a reason why we feel things. All of our emotional responses have a reason, right? And then, of
Why are
course,
emotions so difficult to manage?
yeah, because we've been taught that they're dangerous. I think when we are growing up, our parents often come from homes themselves that weren't particularly understanding about emotional responses, where as parents we're often taught to let our children cry it out, or we behave negatively when they're throwing a tantrum or when they become angry. We tell them to stop being silly, or I'll give you something to cry about. These are the statements that parents often use. So when big uncomfortable feelings come up, people generally don't know what to do with them, and in many ways they're learning that this is a negative response that people don't like, so we need to get rid of this response really quickly. But the reality is that our emotional responses exist for a reason, right? Like we have the full range of them, all the way from excitement, love, happiness, all the way through to grief, anger, sadness, and even fear. And every time that there is an emotional response, It's there to tell you that there's something happening. One of your emotional needs are not being met. So it's really important for us to be able to listen to what our feelings are trying to tell us.
You said in your book that it is entirely possible to view your emotional world and anxiety as a friend instead of the dreaded cause of emotional pain. What do you
Yeah.
mean? What do you mean?
Yeah. So I guess this is where it starts to unfold for me, is that when when my husband, probably about 3 or 4 years later, he landed up becoming really anxious as well. And similarly, it had been a big altercation at his work that had triggered a core belief for him. And he became really anxious at the moment. His chest sort of felt really painful. And instead of looking at that as being, oh, I'm anxious, he immediately thought there was something wrong with him and that he had like a rare lung disease. And that sort of progressed into 18 months of him struggling with really severe health anxiety. And his story was so different from mine, right? Like I went into therapy and very quickly mine resolved, but he stayed stuck and he stayed in this fear response of consistently looking at his anxiety, or at least the symptoms, as being dangerous. And it was then that I started to realize that we've got these two experiences of anxiety that can happen. And often the people that are staying stuck are the people who are afraid of their anxiety. So they're not listening to why the anxiety has come up. They're just looking at the anxiety as being a problem. And everybody has their own story on how they become anxious, or how they discover that they have anxiety. But the vast majority of people will agree that they start to feel symptoms and then they go and see a doctor, and the doctor says, oh, the problem is anxiety, take these tablets and you'll feel better. So immediately we've looked at anxiety and we've said it's a disorder, it's an illness, you're damaged, there's something wrong with you. Not once does anyone stop and go, oh, you're anxious and I wonder what that's about. But the minute that we can stop and look at why the anxiety is there, it's always asking us to pay attention to something that it believes is a threat. Now, sometimes that threat isn't obvious, and sometimes it's not even rational, but very commonly it is pointing to something in ourselves that is being triggered by our environment. So, in the case of my husband, for example, he had this altercation at work that had triggered a core belief of his that he was a failure. And so it starts to point out the pieces of ourselves, or the old programming that might have been created in our childhood or our past experiences, that actually no longer serves us. So now we're in this new place in our lives that we're busy creating for ourselves, and all of a sudden, our personal growth triggers something in us. We start to feel anxious. We can't understand why. We go to the doctor, we're told that that's the problem. But instead, if we could stop and go, hang on, what is my anxiety alerting me to? If I could look inward and find out what core belief is being triggered here, or what thing am I avoiding, or what part of myself am I not looking after, or
But you're making it sound so easy and very easy to diagnose and very easy to understand. But the person that is suffering, okay, I mean, like for example, your husband, okay,
a
he,
disorder.
I lost you there, and
Yeah,
I was talking. So I was actually asking the question that your husband, he kind of had, what do you call it, chest infection, chest pains, and other what do you call it? He had his own diagnosis that what was wrong with him physically, health issues. But for him to be accepting that is the problem is anxiety related, okay, it's a big difference between where he perceives he's got a health issue, and then somebody tells him, okay, no, 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 you got nothing. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just pure anxiety. How
yeah.
no? Because my no, the question I was trying to ask is how easy or difficult is it to diagnose a person with anxiety? If you understand what I mean, or what I'm trying to say is, I've had somebody, and that person had issues,
Yeah.
but he was he had some physically and everything. Trying to say, but he wasn't convincing. Wasn't willing to move. Wasn't willing to do anything about it, and although it was he was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, but because of the physical symptoms that he was showing, he was having a difficulty trying to convince himself that is only just anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. And that often happens because anxiety does present itself as very, very physical.
Mm,
So I think most people believe that it's only a mental experience, but it is a full body experience. And when you get put into that fight or flight response, or that sympathetic activation is what we call it,
mhm,
then it affects your entire system, right? And so those symptoms come up for reasons. There's lots of reasons why it presents in certain ways, like chest pain, for example, or breathing difficulties or increased heart rate. And some people even have extreme experiences of, tingling fingers and numb faces and, dizziness or high vision floaters. There's lots of strange things that can happen. And immediately when we go to the doctor, we would think that that is a physical experience. But then when the doctor says, oh, we've done all the tests and there's nothing coming up here, then it is okay for us to recognize that this is actually an anxious experience. It takes, at that point, the decision to stop believing the fear that there is something else wrong with me. And, that's what it took my husband a really long time to be able to do that as well. But it was when we stopped looking at how are you feeling, what is happening in your body, and we started going, you know what, you're anxious, let's just accept that, and let's start focusing on something else. Because the more that you focus on those symptoms, the more you're going to fear them, and the more you fear them, the more anxiety you create, and then the more symptoms you create.
sure, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And in your book, you mentioned that you can't get anxiety unstuck. Okay, I mean that's what your whole book is. The main thesis is. What do
Yes.
you mean by getting it unstuck? I mean, how?
Yeah, so this is the big thing, right? Is that most of us just see anxiety as the problem,
Mhm,
but there are different types of anxiety. When you're feeling anxious about, going to your new job or moving to a different country or going and hanging out with this group of people that you've never met before, that's ordinary anxiety. That's your anxiety telling you there's something important happening and you kind of need to pay attention. But when we're anxious and then we stop understanding why we're anxious, and most people, when I ask them, what is your worst case scenario here? Then they'll tell me a story about the fact that they are afraid that they will become anxious when they're driving, or that they'll have a panic attack in an airplane, or that they'll have anxiety when they're on holiday. These are clear indications to me that they have become anxious about being anxious. So that's the part where it gets stuck on itself. And that was the thing that was differentiating, the quarter of clients who came to me and got well and moved on, and myself, for example, in my therapy, we were anxious about something else. It was ordinary anxiety that we could process. But when we're stuck, when anxiety has become stuck, that's really the anxiety disorder, as we would call it. That's when we're looping in and remaining anxious, because the more anxious you are about being anxious, the more anxiety you're creating to fear. And that's that looping cycle. So the only way that we can really stop that, when I talk about becoming unstuck from anxiety, it is really about stopping the fear of anxiety by understanding it for what it actually is, and then beginning to change our response to it. We do not want to be afraid of it. We want to be able to accept that this is a real valid feeling and I can process it or I can sit with it.
okay. Now I'm going to ask two questions at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. One, what is the ease method that you have described in the book? Okay. Can you please elaborate on the four steps?
Yeah.
Secondly, how useful are the techniques like deep breathing and other things? And how are the exercises which the traditional, the book, self-help books and others, mention about how to deal with anxiety? How are they, different than the ease method? Why is
Yeah,
ease
absolutely.
method so important and special?
Great question. So the ease method is really designed to be able to undo that response to anxiety, right? It wants to move us from fear of anxiety to being able to accept it, or at least to a place of empowered acceptance. So in my work with people, I've realized that there are four main response types. So four main ways that people can respond to anxiety. It's all described in the book, right? There's the anxious fixation, which is really kind of fixated on the symptoms and always focusing on how we feel and what's happening now and what are my symptoms doing. And the more we do that, of course, the more anxious we feel. The second response type is nervous control. And that's when people are desperate to try to bring the anxiety under control. So they start reaching for all sorts of strategies, everything under the sun that they can find to try to minimize the anxiety. So they're trying to control it, but the amount of things that they're doing is actually causing more nervous energy and more anxiety. So it continues to progress the anxiety. The third response type is shameful submission, which is where people become really ashamed or defeated by the fact that they have what they might think is a mental illness or a disorder. So they begin to believe the things that they're telling themselves, that they're worthless and pathetic and nobody wants to be around them and no one wants to see them anxious. And so they become really ashamed of the experience, which then obviously drives more anxiety. The fourth response type, where we really want to be, is empowered acceptance. This is where we kind of understand what anxiety is telling us. We know why it's there. We understand that it's not there to harm us, and we can accept this feeling that has come. The biggest thesis around this is the fact that any emotional response that you experience, anything, will naturally subside if we let it. So, think about your happiest time when you're laughing with a friend and you're just laughing and laughing and having such a wonderful time. And then all of a sudden the laughter just subsides. It just comes down. No one asked you to stop. You didn't try to stop. It just naturally happened. The only way that you could continue laughing is if somebody told another joke or kind of elaborated on what was funny, then you could keep laughing. But naturally it would come down. And every emotional response is like that. When you're sad, when you're angry, even when you're anxious, the reason why we stay there is because we start to have a feeling about the feeling. So, for example, if we're sad, then we become sad that we're sad, and we might feel like we're ruining the day for everyone, and we're, being a dampener on the party. And so then that creates more sad feelings. And in the same way, we become anxious about being anxious. So if we could just accept that we have this emotional response right now and then not feel anything more about it, then we're not layering more anxiety into it. That's the acceptance part. So the E.A.S.E method is designed, it's a 4-step process to help people achieve empowered acceptance of their anxiety. The first step is about understanding what anxiety is, how it works in your body, why it causes the symptoms that it does. Particularly for people who have health anxiety, understanding how anxiety can cause a sore chest or ringing ears or floaters in your vision. It helps so much because then it makes sense. Otherwise, we're sitting there going, there's no ways that a feeling can cause this physical symptom. So that's one part of it. Also understanding the root cause, understanding your core beliefs, understanding why anxiety would pop up in these instances, the reasons for it. These are all ways in which we begin to feel more empowered about the anxiety. Because if you're left feeling, I don't understand why I'm anxious, that's generating fear. Instead of saying, oh, I get it. I get why I'm anxious. That's an empowered response. The second step, the A, stands for acceptance. So once we're understanding why we're anxious, now we can accept that we're anxious. So the strategies here are allowing ourselves to just sit with the feeling, allowing it to be there, creating room in your body for it, instead of fighting it or trying to make it go away or overly focusing on it or diving into it and making it more. We simply let it be. It's kind of based on the Buddhist philosophy of not attachment. Of just mindfully letting something pass and, not judging it, not creating anything more of it, not making it mean more than it does. The breath work and the strategies that you asked about that people often teach, it would work really well here if we're using it for the right reason. So when we're using breath work or relaxation or meditation to try to be rid of anxiety, there's always going to be a part of us that's trying to see if it's working. So there's always going to be a part of you that's got your eye on the anxiety, which means that you're kind of anticipating that it won't work. And you can see how that level of anticipation is probably generating just a little bit of anxiety in the background while you're doing this tool. So then when you're looking to see, has it worked, you're likely going to see a bit of anxiety there, which then leaves you feeling this isn't working. So that's why those strategies aren't as effective when you're using them to be rid of anxiety. But if you could use your breath to just create space in your body for you and your anxiety to exist alongside each other, well, that's a strategy that you're now using to accept anxiety and to let it flow. So when you're allowing it to process the way that you would with your laughter or your sadness, then it can naturally subside. So the third step of the E.A.S.E method, which is S, stands for shift, because once you've accepted that you are anxious, we also need to shift our focus off of it. And the biggest mistake that most people make is that they keep looking. They keep looking to see how anxious are they? Are their symptoms going away? Are they feeling better? Is it coming back? I work with clients who sometimes have days of no anxiety, but they keep checking for it. And of course, if you're going to check, you're going to find it. So it's really important for us to begin making other parts of our lives more important than the anxiety. And it makes sense that when anxiety is there interrupting us, that we would want to make it the most important problem to solve. But when you do that, you're generating more anxiety. So the shift step is all about how do we get our eye off of the anxiety and back onto more important things? How to be present in your life, focusing on things that matter. The last step is the E, and that's engage, because most people who are anxious have started avoiding things. They've started avoiding going out to public places or traveling or going on vacation, being in vehicles. So we really want to get us back out there. And the goal of engage is not exposure. It's about being able to be in the world and be present in it while accepting that I might have to take my anxiety along with me. The biggest fear that people have, say, for example, with flying, is that they might have a panic attack on the airplane. And so they're then terrified of having that panic attack. And as you can imagine, the terror creates panic. So if they could just get on an airplane and go, well, I might have a panic attack and that's fine by me, I know what I'm going to do, that's a very different feeling. And that's engaging. I'm going to go out of my life, I'm going to engage with things. And if I'm anxious, so what? I'll be anxious. Just like if I go out and do something with a headache, I will go and do it. I'll take my headache with me and I'll go and do that thing. So that's the 4-step E.A.S.E method and how we would use those strategies as part of the E.A.S.E method, but not to get rid of anxiety.
Okay, that was very enlightening. Right, I have one final question.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it's not a serious one, but no. Is it possible to actually we don't get anxiety at all? Can we? Is there a switch off button that we can press? That
If only, right? If there was only a button that we could say, we'll never have another uncomfortable feeling ever again. But no, 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 because anxiety really is one of your key survival mechanisms. Without it, you wouldn't actually survive. Most people don't even realize that the reason why you get out of bed in the morning when your alarm goes off is because you've had a slight piece of anxiety that's gone, there's an important thing you have to do here. If you don't get up and go to work, you won't make money, you won't put food on the table, you won't survive. So anxiety pushes you to actually do some of the things that maybe we don't really want to do. It is a very necessary part of who we are. It just doesn't have to be loud and intrusive, right?
okay? I think I've run out of questions. And is there anything else that you think we missed out and that you wish to add?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I really teach my clients and hopefully the message in the book is really clear around this is that as human beings, we are designed to feel lots of things. And often we miss the point that we only want to feel the happiness, the excitement, the joy. But those things don't exist without the downside of them. Our entire world is duality, right? Like you have darkness because you have light, and you have hate because you have love, and you have abundance because you have scarcity. So in the same way, we have positive emotional experiences because we have negative ones. You can't have one without the other. So if we want to experience the range of positive joy and excitement and love that we are capable of feeling, we must also be okay with feeling the opposite of those things to the same degree. And I think what's happened in society is that we're trying to bring our feelings into ever more narrow bands of what we call normal, right? Like, don't feel too much, don't sleep too much, don't laugh too much, don't talk too much, don't fear too much. And what we're doing is we're just kind of blunting ourselves when, in fact, as human beings, we are raw, we are messy, we are full of emotional responses. And even if they're uncomfortable, they are not harmful. They are really part of who we are. So, learning to accept that and sit with that really allows us to step into our full potential.
Can I just pause here and
Mm-hmm.
just trying to understand what you just trying to explain and have I understood that right? So, would you say that the modern lifestyle, the technology, and everything else that has, it has obviously everybody accepts that it has changed the way
Yeah.
we are and the way everything. But so what you are saying is that we need to accept now go back more to the natural way of life rather than being in a superficial way of life.
Yes, I think that is definitely part of it. I think that we, for sure, when, with social media and everything that is out there in the world that is demonstrating how people are, it's not showing the full range of humans, right? Like no one goes onto social, well, very few people rather go onto social media and show their most awful moments, or the moments that they're crying, or the moments that are terrifying for them. We're only ever really showing the good. So there is an expectation for us all that we all need to behave a certain way. But I also feel like when we go to the doctors, if we're outside of this sort of normal range, which, who's decided what's normal here, then we immediately get given a tablet. That's where I'm saying if you talk too much, then you're probably manic. And if you do too much, then you might be ADHD. And if you're too sad, then you're depressed. And if you sleep too much, then you've got a sleeping problem. And for sure, there are people that are struggling in the outer ranges of those experiences. But we're also starting to create this idea that we all have to behave in this very narrow band. And and that's not normal for human beings. So again, like I often find that I have clients who have maybe been on medication or antidepressants, and it's kind of leveled them out, and that's felt good. But now they're terrified of coming off those medications because it might mean that they have to feel things again. And then they have to go in these highs and lows, which they've now been taught isn't normal. So if we look at our kids, and if we even look at teenagers and some adults even, there's a range of experience, there's a range of emotional outbursts and laughter as well as sadness. This is a normal thing. We do not need to pathologize it unless that experience is getting in the way of us functioning, if that makes sense.
Sure, I agree with that. Okay. Would you like to share any of your website or your social media?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is theunstuckinitiative.com, all
Mhm.
one word. And you can find me on Instagram at ease.anxiety. And my TikTok handle is the same, ease.anxiety. And I really do love connecting with people. So if you're on there and you send me a DM, I guarantee I will reply.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Diante.
Thank you
Thank you
so much
very
for
much.
having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right.